All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar about unified archiving. My name is Sheldon Mills. I'm a marketing manager here, and I'm here with Q Mangus. He's the Director of Product Marketing for Retain here at Micro Focus. I just want to start off by thanking everyone for attending the webinar, and we hope you'll get a lot of benefit from the information we're presenting today. We're going to have a Q&A session addressing several of the most frequent questions we get regarding archiving, best practices, and specifically Retain. I'll be asking those questions and Q will be answering them. We have a bunch of questions and topics we want to get to. However, if you have your own questions as we go through this webinar, please share them in the Q&A or the chat panel because those are the most important ones. We want to make sure and address those as we go along. Q, would you like to introduce yourself?
Welcome everyone. Really happy to be here. But yeah, we're really excited for the information that we're going to present and for everyone for being here. And hope you can benefit from what we're going to talk about on Retain Unified Archiving and some of the concerns and how it can help you with your archiving needs.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, if you give us that information, then Q can specifically address those ones that are most popular, or actually all of them, but make sure we address all of them of everybody who's here. Thank you, Q, for that. Let's go ahead and get started. Just so you know, we're going to start the format of this. We're going to start with the why, the what, and the how of archiving, the reasons to archive, regulations, and then what you should be archiving, the biggest pieces, and then how to archive all of those things with Retain. How about we just jump right in then? First question. I get this one all the time. What are some concerns that archiving addresses?
Some of the top concerns that we've seen, this is just from people that we've talked to both at events, at some of our customers, and just in general with our tech support, everybody. We've kind of compiled a list of some of the things that people are dealing with when it comes to their communication. And so these are some of the things that archiving addresses. And so some things that you just need to be thinking about, and that is how do you deal with e-discovery? What are some of the things that you will do if you are involved in e-discovery, if you're involved in litigation? How can you make sure that you manage that? So that's one thing. Another thing is compliance. So we know there's a lot of regulations out there that affect what and how you archive, and so you need to make sure that you comply with those. And it depends on your industry and the type of organization that you are, but that can really affect you. Another one is just, and this affects everyone, of course, is that's data management. How are you managing your communication data? How are you managing your email communication? How are you managing social media, mobile? We'll get into that, but that's one thing that's really important is how you're managing that data and what happens as that data gets older. How do you eliminate that if you need to? How do you have policies in place to make sure that you have the data when you need it and how you need it? Another one is this idea of personal archives and PST files. This is a huge thing when it comes to email. We know that with Exchange and even Office 365 does this, that PSTs can be scattered and there can be personal archives on everybody's machine. How do you make sure that that doesn't happen, that those PSTs aren't out there? And then with GroupWise, you've got these personal archives. How do you make sure that you manage those so that you have everything in one central location? That's a lot with data management, but that specific thing is very important because that affects a lot of people. Because going back to e-discovery or litigation, if you have all that stuff scattered out there, how do you get to it? And then going along a little bit more is costs, right? As your storage needs grow, an archiving system can help you manage costs. But it's even more than that because we know that a lot of stuff has moved to the cloud. Some of your costs come into the fact of being able to get to your data. How quickly can you get to it? How much is that going to cost you to access your data? And how much is it going to cost you to perform e-discovery and be prepared for litigation? So costs, I know that sounds pretty broad, but it addresses a lot of things. If you're dealing with on-prem things, it has to do with your storage. If you're dealing with cloud, how quickly can you get to your data? And with either on-prem or cloud, email systems, social media, and archiving, you need to be able to access and get to that data quickly. And so that's where cost could come into factor. Another thing is make sure your information is secure. Um, and that's where archiving comes into play, is by having a secure and compliant archive. And then finally, this idea, and this is huge for certain countries and locations, is data sovereignty. We know that different depending on your type of organization and the location that you're in, you may be required to have that data nearby geographically. um, you may have to make sure that you know where that data is located. I know that's particularly important for government entities, so data sovereignty is a big thing, and the right archiving solution can help address that. So these are some of the concerns that we've seen. Now there are others, of course, and I would imagine that your organization has some of its own. But these are just some of the things that we've seen that are some of the concerns that archiving addresses, and the right archiving solution can address properly.
Thank you. Sorry, I forgot to mention this before. This is being recorded, so you will get a recording, receive an email with that link afterwards as well. Sorry, I forgot to mention that earlier, but want everybody to know. Um, Thank you, Q. Again, more on the why. We get this question: why do I need to archive? Can you go into, I guess, more of the more reasons, more details?
That's great. Yeah, we talked about the concerns and some of the things, but yeah, let's talk about why. Obviously, the concerns are some of the why, but some other things that are the why is, and I'm going to go a little deeper into this, is e-discovery, right? And we touched a little bit about that on a concern, but just so you know, it was recently found that about 46% of organizations have had an e-discovery request over the past year. So there's a good chance that if you haven't been involved in e-discovery, you will be. Another thing that Gartner found is that 75% of global companies, now this is a last year's stat, but it can be applied to us now, is about 75% of global companies will be involved in litigation where you have to be able to produce communication by the end of the year. I think this was a couple of years ago this poll came out, but it's the information is still relevant that there's a good chance that your organization will be involved in litigation if you haven't been. Now this varies depending on the type of organization you are. You know, some organizations are involved a lot more than others, but there's a good chance that you'll be involved in that. The other thing is that we talked a little bit about data management earlier, but one of the things that was recently found is that digital business data is growing. Oh, there's a typo there, but it's growing at a rate of 40 to 60% each year. Missed the typo there, but yeah, 40 to 60% each year is the rate of growth for digital business data. So if you think about right now what you're currently storing, whether that's on premise or in the cloud, imagine that growing. So you need to be able to have a plan and a strategy to manage that data, and that's where archiving comes in, as it helps you manage your communication data as it grows. The archive can actually help that to reduce that growth because it stores it in a much more efficient and compressed way. Next, you have this idea, and this is where archiving can help when it comes to policy, to having policy-based archiving, is the ability to get rid of old data. We see that 15 to 60% of data will become redundant, outdated, trivial, and risky. So 15 to 60% of the data that you have actually represents that. So you need to be able to get rid of redundant, outdated, and trivial data, and even risky data. And so archiving with the correct archiving solution with the correct policies in place can actually help you manage what needs to be saved and what needs to be gone. Is the best way to put it. So that's another thing that archiving helps, and so that's one of the reasons the why, and some of the reasons to do that. And then specifically in industries, there are specific concerns that each industry has, and that depending on the industry that you're in, that will affect the why, right? So financial, you have this idea of data leakage. You need to make sure that your data stays secure, and archiving helps that because you can store that in a secure location. You can have rights-based access. This is the correct kind of archiving solution. And of course, you need to be able to easily access data and produce that. And this is for financial. And then your data is also subject to review and procedures. So those all are concerns with financial. Healthcare, there's the PHI, protected health information. You want to make sure that that isn't leaked, that that's protected, and that communications can't contain medical records and payment history. So you could easily prove that with the correct archiving solution. And then government. You know, as a government agency, that you have a lot of regulations, and that, of course, FOIA is something that kind of looms over your head. And so that's something to really take note of, is that you need to be able to readily access your data and make it available. And in the case of FOIA, you need to be able to adhere to an information request within 10 days of its receipt. And then, of course, you have this problem with deleted emails. You want to be able to make sure that your employees and contractors that deal with your email system can't delete email without it being archived and stored and readily available. And then, of course, for everybody else, you need to preserve your electronic communication for litigation readiness and accusation preparation. So the idea there is that if you're ever involved in litigation, you can prove your side of it. If there's an accusation, you can have an archive. You can have everything in the archive that you can easily and readily get to be prepared. So those are some of the reasons on why you should archive. Obviously, your organization has probably other reasons why you should, but those are some of the things that we've seen when it comes to e-discovery, being prepared for litigation, being able to access your data, being able to manage your data, and even just the idea of making your email system run more efficiently by taking it off of that email system is another great reason.
Leads us perfectly to our next question. Do you have any specific regulations that affect particular organizations, depending on their sector and whatnot?
So yeah, there's a lot of regulations. So I'm just going to throw up a few. I'm just going to boil it down here, that most of these regulations detail that you need to be archiving email, social media, and mobile, and that you need to be able to readily access that data and be able to produce it in case of an audit. And then you need to be able to prove what has been communicated, and that's especially important with healthcare and financial. So here's just some of the things, as I talked about. There's the Freedom of Information Act, Federal Information Security Management Act, Sunshine Laws. I won't read all of them, but these are some of the regulations that can affect you. And like I said earlier, these regulated industries like financial, healthcare, government, and even legal firms have things that you need to make sure to archive. And everybody else, it doesn't matter if you are in a government agency or a financial firm, you need to be sure to have your electronic communication, that's email, social media, mobile, in case of litigation. And that's regulatory. Obviously, we've talked about other reasons why you should do it, but when it comes to regulations, you need to be able to do that to comply.
Perfect. We've talked about the why. Let's get into the what. What should a company be archiving?
So it's interesting because there was a recent poll done by Austrian Research about what organizations are archiving right now. And so this is just a snippet of that poll, and we see that a lot of people are archiving email. Most organizations are doing that in one shape or another, but they're not archiving Facebook, and they're not archiving Twitter and other social media, and they're also not archiving mobile communication. But the reason why I bring that up is that what I'm showing on the screen here is what you need to be archiving. You need to be archiving your email platform, all the appointments, the messages, the calendar items, everything that's in your email system needs to be archived, and you need to be able to easily access that to review it. When it comes to other items, you need to be archiving your social media accounts. Your company social media accounts is the base of that, so that you can go back and see what has been said, and produce that information for litigation, or just to be able to manage and see what's been going on. And then the other thing is your mobile communication. You need to have oversight on what is being said on mobile, how it's being said. And so those are the things that should be archived. You should be archiving email, everything in your email, social media communication, and mobile communication. That can be phone call logs, text messages, etc.
So, okay, awesome. Do you have any advice particularly about mobile devices and BYOD?
So yeah, since we were touching on that, yes, you do need to archive mobile, and particularly with mobile device archiving, mobile communication, you need to view that the same as email or social media for archiving. It needs to be archived. So my advice would be you need to make sure to have a communication policy. And that communication policy, everyone needs to be aware of it, and it needs to make sure to cover your email system. What is appropriate on email communication. Um, and obviously, most people know, but you still need to be saying that and have it clearly stated and let everybody be able to sign that policy. But that policy should apply to mobile communication and social media as well. And it needs to state what you can and cannot do on mobile communication. And that's kind of the basis of it. So as long as you have a policy that states what they can't do, that kind of helps. And so, for example, if you have a lot of employees that are bringing their own device to work, have a policy for what they can do. If they want to be able to access your corporate email or be able to communicate with that personal device, you need to have a policy for what they can and can't do. And so if and that policy needs to state that you're going to have oversight of mobile communication. So if it's a corporate owned device, obviously that's really easy. You can install something on there, and we'll talk about that with Retain in particular, but you can install something on there that will have oversight of all communication. For BYOD, it's a little different. You don't necessarily want to be able to see everything that's going on that phone. You don't want to see personal phone call logs and personal text messages. And so a good solution for that is something that's a dual persona, where the personal information stays personal, and then there's a business application that they can communicate all their business communication, whether that's text and phone calls and email, from a separate persona. And so that would be my advice for mobile communication archiving, is that if you have corporate devices, fine. Make sure you're archiving everything that's being done on that corporate device. Make sure you have a policy that states what's appropriate and what is not. And then if people are bringing their own device, make sure to have something where they can communicate on their business side that's separate from personal. And that's what we like to call a dual persona.
What about a company social media account? What do you do about that?
So that's really important. You need to be able to once again have that policy that states what your employees can and cannot do on social media, if they can access social media at work. But what you really need to be able to do is archive your corporate social media accounts. It's really important so that you can be able to, one, see what has been said, be able to have that historical record of what has been said, and then also be aware of any kind of posts that may be inappropriate. People are posting things to your corporate account, or people posting things via your corporate account that may not be appropriate. You should be able to have a solution that will alert you for certain keywords, certain things that you don't deem appropriate. For questions, say somebody asks you a question on social media, you need a solution to be able to see that, and then also that alerts you for personal identifiable info, stuff that shouldn't be posted on there. And then of course you need to be able to have a solution to archive that communication so that you can go back and see that. And that really applies to corporate social accounts. You need to have that archived, and then any employee social media account that's used in an official manner. So if you have employees that are using social media accounts to communicate with your customers, that's where it would come into play, that you need to be able to archive that to be able to have oversight of what's being said there. So the idea there, once again, is to have a policy that states what is and is not appropriate, has alerts, and you have that oversight.
Perfect. So let's jump in now into Retain, and I get this all the time. So what does Retain archive?
So Retain is unique in the sense that we call it Retain Unified Archiving, and the reason why we call it that is that Retain archives multiple systems. So it archives mobile communication. It archives it for, since we were talking about mobile, I'll hit on that, archives mobile communication for BlackBerry and Android, and that can be done natively. Directly from the device. And then for iOS and Android, it can archive dual persona. We've partnered with CellTrust to be able to provide a dual persona app so that you can communicate via business, and Retain archives it. And then for email, it supports Exchange, Office 365, GroupWise, Gmail, and now IBM Notes, which was a recent addition. So what Retain does, it can actually archive all of those platforms independently, and it can archive them all at the same time. So if you have a mixed environment, so say you're running Exchange in Office 365, or something that's pretty common is you're running Office 365 in Gmail, Retain can archive both of those, and it's archived into the same central archive. And then Retain also archives social media, your corporate social accounts, and like I said, any official or any employee accounts that are communicating in an official way, that are using their accounts for corporate communication. Retain can archive that, and it's archived on and off the network. So those are the platforms that are archived. And the reason why we call it Retain Unified Archiving is that it archives all of these communications, email, social media, and mobile, into one central archive. And that central archive can be easily accessed via multiple ways, via a web access archive viewer, a mobile application that we've developed, via plugins for your email client, and I'll show that a little bit more, and then a standalone archive viewer. So that's Retain, kind of in a circle, in a nutshell, is that it archives all email, social media, and mobile, and it archives in that one central location.
So how does Retain work with each of those email platforms?
So yeah, when it comes to email in particular, as I stated, Retain archives mixed email environments. If you have a mixed environment or a single environment, it works with Exchange, Office 365, Gmail, GroupWise, and IBM Notes. There's e-discovery and publishing, redaction and export to PDF in the Web Access Archive Viewer. When it comes to each platform in particular, let me touch on that a little bit. For example, with Exchange and its built-in archiving, there are some deficiencies there, and Retain solves these deficiencies. So if you're running Exchange and you have the built-in archive, you don't have support for additional platforms. You don't have support to archive mobile or social media. There is limited support to export to PDF. We'll touch on a lot of these things. There's a lack of single instance storage. And then it's difficult to migrate your data when it comes to Exchange. And then for Office 365, it's similar. To be able to archive Office 365, you have to have an Enterprise E3 license. So if you have an E1 and it's just for email, you can't archive that with the built-in plan, where with Retain you can. Once again, there's no support for other things like social media or mobile communication. You can't archive multi-platform emails. So if you're running the built-in Office 365 archiving, it only archives Office 365 email. You can't archive other email systems. There's the lack of redaction. We'll talk about the standalone archive viewer, which doesn't have. And then, of course, you don't have that central access to other communications. And then also, of course, the migration path is difficult from there. So with Office 365 in particular, Retain ties directly to Office 365 and Exchange, and it archives all of email communication, all calendar items, all appointments, folders. And I'm going to show this a little bit later on how it looks, but it archives everything that's in your email system directly into Retain, and it supports all Office 365 plans. So if you're running an E1 plan, you can archive with Retain. And Retain has that built-in litigation support with e-discovery and redaction. And then, of course, it supports those multiple platforms. So Retain can solve those deficiencies with Exchange and Office 365 built-in archiving, and give you that full archiving solution that archives all of your electronic communication in that one central archive. And then, of course, one other thing is that it supports single instance storage, so your storage footprint is going to be smaller, and whether that's on-premise or in the cloud. As a number of people here on Gmail, I'm going to touch on Google archiving, Google Vault archiving, some of the limitations. We know that that's something that with certain plans on G Suite, you can get Google Vault included. But the one thing there, once again, is that idea that you can't archive other electronic communications. Your social media and mobile can't be in Google Vault. The e-discovery is lacking. There is this idea of higher costs and dead costs, and what that means is that to be able to continue to archive in Google Vault, you have to continue to pay for a G Suite license or a Gmail license. So where with archiving with Retain, you don't have to, and I'll touch on that a little bit. But you don't have to because it's archived separate from Gmail, from the G Suite. So it's archived, and you don't have to continue to pay for that license. You can use it for someone else, or you can reduce your license costs. And then cloud only, which can be difficult depending on your organization. I know that some organizations need an on-prem solution. And then some other things too is there's no support for multiple email addresses per user. So it's disparate, meaning one user is going to have to go into separate things to be able to see each of their different email addresses if they have multiple email addresses. Exporting is lacking, being able to export to PDF and PST. Another thing that's huge is the ability to restore messages to the live inbox. Google Vault's path for doing that is very difficult. I'll touch on it just really quick. You have to export it to their Mbox format. Then you have to have an Mbox converter to convert to PST, and then you have to have a PST file importer to import it back into Gmail. So it's difficult, and you have to have 2 or 3 solutions to do that. So that's a difficulty with Google Vault. Whereas with Retain, it ties directly into Gmail, and so you can archive Gmail messages, Gmail notes, and appointments and calendar items, the iCalendar appointments and calendar items. And in fact, the integration is so complete that in the 2014 Gartner Magic Quadrant for Enterprise Information Archiving, Gartner stated that Retain is one of the few solutions that offers that native Gmail archiving support and not through SMTP. So that's a native archiving support directly into Gmail. So it's a great solution for those of you who are running Gmail. It'll tie directly in there so you don't lose any information, and you have that ability to perform e-discovery. You can restore messages directly to Gmail with Retain. It's really cool. All you have to do is, and I'll show that in a little bit, but it works the same for Gmail as everything else. So you just click on a message, hit restore, it goes right back into Gmail. And that goes the same for Exchange and Office 365 and GroupWise. And now, particularly for GroupWise, there's a lot of people here on GroupWise as well. Retain securely archives all GroupWise email, appointments, files, and attachments. So it ties directly to GroupWise. It pulls that information down. We can actually even grab all personal archives. So if you have personal archives that are out on your system, Retain can ingest those and have those in there, and then there's no need to have them in the future. That also goes for those on Exchange and Office 365. For PST files, Retain can pull those in. You can turn off your ability for end users to have those PSTs, and it's all archived into Retain. And so that works for GroupWise with personal archives. You can turn that functionality off because it's all going to be archived in Retain in that central archive. And there's other tools that are built in. There's e-discovery tools that are built into Retain. And that's a unique feature in Retain. Your end users have access to the archive. And of course, it helps with regulation compliance. So I'm going to show a few things. So for those on Exchange and Office 365, there's an Outlook plugin. It's great because your users don't have to go out to the web to access Retain. They can go right from Outlook. We're making it as easy as possible for them to access their archive. All they have to do is hit Retain. It's going to pull up the ability to see all their archived messages directly from Outlook. They can do the search functionality as well. Also, you can cache archived messages in Outlook. So if there are users that you have that are offline on occasion, Retain gives you the ability to have those messages whether they're on connected to the internet or not. And that plugin also works for Outlook web app. So OA, it also is available there as well. For those on GroupWise, there is a GroupWise plugin. Similar thing. It's right there in the GroupWise client. You click Open Retain Archive. They can search and perform those functions of Retain directly from GroupWise. And it's also available in web access to be able to access Retain directly from there. So that is everything kind of quickly on what Retain does for email, how it works with Office 365, Exchange, Gmail, GroupWise. And once again, if you have one, I'm going to go back here really quick because I like this slide. If you have one email system or multiple systems, retain archives all of that. And one other thing just to take note of, if you ever do need to migrate from one system to another, so say you're on Exchange today and you're moving to Office 365, Retain can help you with that because it's all archived. All messages are archived in a platform agnostic format. So for the end user or for an administrator to search, it doesn't look any different. So if you're running Exchange today and everything's archived in Retain and you deploy Office 365 tomorrow, you just tie Office 365 to Retain and now you're up and running, and all your historical Exchange messages are in Retain, and your Office 365 messages going forward are in there, and the view for end users and administrators is the same in Retain, so it makes the migration easy.
Awesome. That was a lot of info. Email, but pretty in-depth. What about social media? How does Retain, or what does Retain do with social media?
Great, perfect. So let's touch on social really quick. I'm going to go back through those slides really. Okay. So Retain Social, we give you the ability to monitor and archive social media. So what Retain does is it ties with these platforms: Pinterest, Instagram, LinkedIn, Google+, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Vimeo, and Flickr. And Retain ties directly to those platforms. It pulls them in, and it captures full resolution pictures, videos, GIFs, and other data formats. It allows you to connect to these social media accounts without the login info. And you also have alerts for keywords, questions, and personal identifiable info, as we were talking about before. So all of these communications are we've partnered with a company called Archive Social. So Archive Social captures the information and then it pushes it directly into Retain, and now you have the ability to have that oversight of mainly for your corporate social media accounts or accounts that are being used in an official way for your, like, employees communicating with your customers or communicating with other employees, business communications. If your employees are doing that, you can connect to those social media accounts, and everything's going to be archived, whether they're on or off the network, once they're authenticated and logged in. So here's kind of a view of how it works. These platforms are captured via Archive Social. Archive Social pushes them into Retain, and then administrators, end users, etc., can access those via Retain, and you have that complete historical archive of everything that's been done. You have everything preserved in its native format, and you have advanced search and tagging with Retain. Here's just a view really quick of Archive Social and the search of social media. Here's where you'd connect. As I stated, you don't have to have the login credentials. All you have to do is be logged into one of the accounts that are going to be archived. You just click one of these here, like connect to a Facebook, connect to Twitter, and it's going to authenticate directly there. You don't have to actually have the login information. And then now you're off and running and you're archiving social media, and it's pulled into Retain. And I'll show you in a little bit what that looks like, along with some other things, but it's pulled directly into Retain, and you can search and perform e-discovery and place holds, and that's kind of the idea behind the social media, is that you have that ability to have it in that same central archive and have oversight of social media communication.
Mobile. We already have a couple questions in the queue about mobile. Q, I didn't know if you wanted to go through mobile first and then address those questions, or if you wanted me to throw those to you now so you can address it on the way.
Yeah, let's see what the questions are, and then we can make sure I touch on those as we go through
Okay.
communication.
We have a couple of them. First is how do you capture text messages for corporate devices, and specifically if that's limited to the U.S. And then another one is about iPhones in specific, and they need to know how our system Retain works with archiving iPhone text, iOS chat, possible FaceTime log.
Great, good questions, and we'll address those. So let me address those two first, and then we'll touch on how Retain works with other social media, or with other mobile communication as well. So, particularly on that first question, I'm going to look at it here. So, how do you capture text messages for corporate devices, and is it limited to the United States? So, it depends on the device. So let me touch on this really quick. So for BlackBerry, for those of you who are using BlackBerry, we tie directly to the BlackBerry Enterprise Service and pull down all your BlackBerry messages, BBM and BBM enterprise messages, PIN messages, and phone call logs. And then for Android, those are the two that we're talking about when it comes to corporate. For Android, we'd be able to pull down all text messages, that's SMS and MMS, and phone call logs. And that is done via an app that's placed on the Android phone, and it pulls them down. And though both BlackBerry and Android is not for the United States only, it's anywhere. That functionality, that feature works anywhere that you are. When it comes to iOS, and this is going to be going to answer both of these questions. When it comes to iOS, Retain, yes, we've partnered with a company called CellTrust, and CellTrust offers a mobile business app. So what that does is it places an app onto your phone, and it can be deployed via an MDM or an EMM solution, and it places an app on the phone. And with that app, you have the ability to communicate in a secure, encrypted way. So you can text internally from a CellTrust user to a CellTrust user, and all that text messages is encrypted. And you can call, and that phone call is all encrypted and secure. That app can also be used to communicate outside of the CellTrust network. You can text directly to people outside. It will go from the CellTrust app via the CellTrust server to the carrier, and then from the carrier out to the user. And now that's viewed from the user as just like a normal text message. They can text message back and forth, and all of that communication, both the internal and external, is all archived in Retain. And so that's how it works, especially for BYOD. If a user is bringing their own iPhone, Retain can archive those communications, the CellTrust communications by the business communications, but it doesn't touch the native personal information. That same functionality works on Android, so if people are bringing Androids as their own device, you can separate it that way. Now, when it comes to a corporate device, say you have a corporate iPhone, what you do is still deploy the CellTrust solution, and you can turn off the native, you can turn off iMessage, you can turn off the native dialer and just use the CellTrust dialer. And then, of course, Retain archives all of the CellTrust communication, all that's done via that CellTrust app. Now, for that in particular, when it comes to CellTrust, from what I understand, that's only available in North America. They are expanding that right now, so the iOS solution is expanding as we go along, but that's currently a solution for North America. But that's really how Retain works for mobile communication. Is it archives those encrypted logs via CellTrust and that mobile business number, and then it does it natively for Android and BlackBerry via the app or via the BlackBerry Enterprise Service. And then what's great is it's all archived into that same central archive with your email and social media, and it can be searched just the same way as other communication, and you can perform e-discovery and place holds on that.
Got it. Did you address this already about if a user has multiple mobile devices?
No, I didn't. That's a good question. So if a user has multiple devices, this is asked a lot. So Retain is priced per device. So depending on the number of devices that you have, there's a cost for each device that's being archived, but and then there's a cost for the CellTrust app if you go that route. But it doesn't matter how many devices a person has. This is a common practice, I know, for users to have multiple devices. It's tied to that person. So when you go into Retain, you'll be able to see the end user will be able to see every device that's being archived, and then administrators will be able to see all their devices, and it's going to be tied to that user. So they can have as many devices as they want, and it's going to be tied back to that user, and it will be all archived into Retain.
Awesome, perfect. Let's see. So, I was just trying to make sure I didn't miss any questions. How does Retain help with the e-discovery portion of it?
Good. And I realized one thing, sorry, that I missed on that last question when it came to FaceTime. let me touch on this really quick. I just looked at that again. When it comes to FaceTime and iMessage, anything that's native onto the iPhone, Apple has not opened that up, so we can't get to it. So yeah, we know that that's difficult, and the best way that we've been able to come up with that is to partner with CellTrust to be able to have that separate mobile business number. But anything that's native on Apple, the phone calls, the FaceTime, iMessage, we actually can't archive that or touch that. So um, okay, moving on. So eDiscovery. So this is something that is unique to Retain, and that is that Retain has eDiscovery tools built in. You don't have to go out and have another solution. You don't have to have an archive and then an eDiscovery tool. You have an eDiscovery tool built in with Retain. You can do searches. You can perform redaction. You can place holds. There's an audit trail to be able to see everything that's gone on. There's configurable permissions. You can quickly and easily access that information. And so that's what's great about Retain is that you have all that information archived, but you can easily and quickly get to it. You can perform quick searches. You can place litigation holds. You can perform redaction. So I'm going to take a minute here, and I'm going to just show you some of the stuff we've been talking about. So I just pulled my screen over. I hope everyone can see that. Here's an example of the mobile archive. So here is an Android phone being archived. Here's all the messages that have been placed, and then here's some phone call, and here's a phone call. And then you can see quickly what that text message said, and be able to do that from there. So a user can see their devices and see what it looks like to be archived there, and then an administrator can see the entire archive. Now, when it comes to email archive, I'm actually going to show you my. This is mine. This is my Retain system, and it's being archived. The reason why I wanted to bring mine up is because I have a lot of folders. So, and I wanted to show you that in Retain it replicates the folder structure over. So when a user goes into their archive, this is what an end user would see. I have end user rights to my archive. I have the ability to view messages. I can forward messages, and I can restore them based on rights. I can also search my archive directly from the search, and it's going to only search my archive. And what's great is that as I start to type in, let's see, it might take a second here, you'll notice that it gives me suggestions of what is in my archive, and it highlights the term that I searched. So that's what an end user can do. And then an administrator, I'm going to go back over to what this is, an administrator one. They can search the entire archive. So I'm flipping back to my tab. This is going to see just what my archive is. I don't see anyone else's. But with an administrator, they have rights to be able, or other named users, they have rights to view the entire archive. You'll also notice that there's buttons here that are available that are not available here because I don't have those rights. But administrators can have full rights, and you can grant different rights to different users depending on what you want. So once again, I'm going to type in here. It's going to give me auto-suggest of things that are in the archive. This is the entire archive. It's a test server, so it's going to be interesting information, right? But you can see that once again, the information was highlighted here, and then you can actually drill down and be able to state what kind of message you're looking for, whether that's a phone message. Let's see if we have any. Oh, there are a couple. If it's an appointment, okay, there's appointments. If it's a task, so you can actually drill down and see different things. If it's let's see if there's a wall post. Let's see if there's a social media. Yep. So there's a Facebook and some LinkedIn messages there. So you can actually drill down and change what you want to see. There's some chats. So what we're trying to do is make it as quick and easy as possible for you to be able to find items and perform that e-discovery. And as you can see here, there's the ability to place things on litigation hold. So say you do a search and you're like, okay, all these items here need to be placed on litigation hold. You quickly can do that, apply that to selected items. As it says here, it prevents the deletion manager from deleting selected items. So that it's going to be on hold for as long as that hold is on there. That message will not be deleted. You can place messages in a confidential state, and what that's going to do is it's going to make it so that only that user can access those, or those who have rights to be able to view that. So you can apply that to those as well. You can tag a message, and what's great is you can create tags for certain things. So if you know that let's say there's a project that's going on, you can create a tag for all those projects so that now you can go back and quickly and easily search those tags. You can delete messages from the archive if you want to grant that ability. You can forward messages out to whomever needs to be forwarded to. You can export them, and what's great from the export is you have the ability to export to PDF. We know that's important for e-discovery or litigation. You can even export it to a standalone archive viewer, and I'll show just a screen grab of that for a minute. But what's great with the standalone archive viewer is that by exporting it to that, it's portable, so you can place that onto a DVD or a jump drive or on Dropbox and hand that off to an outside team. It's a fully indexed archive viewer. Now that outside team can search and perform and can export again to PDF, but they can do searches of that subset of the archive, so they don't have to have access to your entire archive. And then one great feature, and I know a lot of people will like this, and that's the ability to restore, as we talked about the difficulty in restoring from Google Vault and others is if a user you can grant rights to a user so that they can restore their own emails if you want that to be done, or an administrator can restore, of course, anything. So you actually can empower your end users to do a lot on their own by allowing them to restore a message from the Retain archive directly to their live system. And you can print as well. So these tools are built into Retain to make it as easy as possible to be able to perform those searches, to be able to get to your data. And that's the big thing with when it comes to an archive, right? That's really the problem that we're solving, is that you need to manage your data. You need to be able to access your data. An archive doesn't do you really any good if it just sits in the corner and you can never access it. So you need to be able to have tools to quickly and easily access your archive. One other thing that I wanted to take note of, I don't think I mentioned this earlier, is that Retain features policy-based archiving. So you set the policy. So however old you want messages to be, so if you want it to archive everything older than 90 days, it's going to pull that into Retain. And then everything that's, let's say, older than 7 years, if you only want to keep it for 7 years, the minute it hits those 7 years, Retain will drop it off the system. So that's that policy-based archiving. And then once again, when it comes to browsing, like I said, end users can browse their own personal items, and the administrator can view the entire archive, so they'd be able to see other items as well. We showed some mobile. Let's see. There's Exchange. There's an Exchange mailbox. Let's see if I can grab one really quick that has some messages. So let's go back a little bit in years. So once again, an administrator has access, or other named users has access to the entire archive. Looks like this particular server doesn't have anything there, but the idea is that you have a central archive that can access all your electronic communication from one central location, and you have those e-discovery tools. Let me show you really quickly just a screen grab of the archive viewer, or excuse me, of the standalone archive viewer. Okay, we touched on archive search. So here's a standalone archive viewer, and this is what you would see if you exported that. And like I said, it's a subset of the archive. And what's great is from this, you can actually perform redaction. So if there's information that's in the archive that is should not be part of the record, part of what's being exported, you can black that out. You can strike it out, and keep that from being part of the record. So that's some of the tools that are built into Retain for e-discovery. Place those litigation holds, place those tags, exporting, forwarding, etc.
Awesome. One more question that we get a lot, and then I have a bunch more specific as well. How is Retain different from other archiving solutions?
Perfect. So this is some of the ways that we've identified that. Thanks. These are some of the ways that we've identified where Retain is different from the competition. And I know we've touched on a lot of these, but this is a good summary. We talked about unified archiving, being able to archive multiple email systems in one central location, being able to archive other communications in that system. Intelligent granular archiving, and what that means is the ability to tie directly to an email system. So for example, with Exchange, it uses, you can use journaling, you can use the impersonation, or you can also use the Microsoft Recoverable Items folder so that you don't lose anything when it's archived. It's all brought into Retain. You have that flexible archive access where you can archive, or excuse me, where you can access it via that offline archive viewer, the standalone archive viewer. You can access it via the web UI. You can access it via the email plugin, or you can access it via the mobile app that we have. That search tool that I showed you, which is very unique, and being able to auto-populate things that are in there and being able to highlight those terms in there. The search wizard where you can create search terms, and one thing I didn't mention is you can actually search for Boolean terms and use Boolean operators and search for regex terms like credit card numbers and other terms like that to be able to find that information. And then of course that built-in e-discovery, it's not an additional cost to be able to do that, it's just built right in, which includes redaction as well. The ability to easily migrate email systems because it's an archive that's platform agnostic. Those tags that I showed, the built-in smart, confidential, and rule-based tagging. The ability to place holds. One thing that I didn't touch on is that search that I showed you, you actually have the ability to connect Retain to your file systems. So say like a Dropbox or a Filer, SharePoint, Retain can connect to that index. We call it a connector, so that when you do a search, it will actually search those items as well and bring them in so that you can view them and Retain, and then you click on them and it'll go out to SharePoint, for example, and see them. So you can do a search of other items. Retain doesn't archive them, but it allows you to search them. And then the other thing is, and this is especially true for, as we talked about, the data sovereignty, is being able to have multiple cloud options. So depending on what you need, we have a private cloud. It can be deployed via public cloud as well, like on AWS. And we also have partners. So there's a partner cloud. So if you're in a location where your data can't leave your country or has to be geographically targeted or specific, we have the ability to do that for you. So that's where Retain really is different than those other solutions that are out there.
Awesome. We have a few questions to ask you, Q. Can you run Retain in virtual environments?
Absolutely. Retain can be put on a VM. That's perfectly fine. So you just have to spin up a server, and how it works is you have to have a SQL database for metadata, and there's an indexing engine. So you have to be able to you have to have a separate server, and once again that could be virtual, that has an indexing engine, and that can be Lucene, or we also have the Retain high performance indexing engine. So that allows you to when messages are archived, you can quickly and easily access them. And then when it comes to the system itself, you just have to have a partition, and that's where all of the data is actually archived, and then the index is used to be able to quickly find the data, and then the SQL database is for metadata. So yes, I know I talked a lot there, but yes, a virtual environment is fine for everything.
Okay, we have another question about mobile and text messaging. They're asking if text messages thread over a period of time.
So text message threading, that is something we're working on. It's not threaded right now in text messaging. For social media, it is threaded, and you can see the message thread. But for text messaging, you just see each individual message. Now, it is timestamped, so you can extrapolate from that what the message was when you're browsing that for text messages, but that is something that we're working towards, on having it threaded based on when the message was sent and received. But as it currently stands, it's just archived per message.
We got a question here about WhatsApp texts and if we can collect those.
Nope. WhatsApp would be great. That's not currently something we do, but obviously we have the ability to add other things. Retain has that flexibility, so with enough requests and enough demand for that, that's something that we could potentially add in the future. But as of now, we do not.
We have a question about migrating archive systems. Someone has a Nearpoint Mimosa and wants to know if we have tools to archive that data into our archive system.
Absolutely. So what we do is we've actually partnered with a company called TDS, and we do have a path to be able to migrate your archive into Retain. Um, we've done it before a number of times, and it's a process, obviously, but it is something that can be done, and we make sure that you don't lose any of your data, that it's all in Retain, and that you can search that. But that is something that we can do via Trusted Data Solutions and a tool that they have.
We have another one asking about Retain servers again, the platforms. If it's just MS SQL and Windows servers, or if there's others as well.
Yeah, so it can be Retain supports Linux, so you could do a SUSE Linux enterprise server. The SQL database, it's MS SQL, MySQL, Oracle. Let me make sure there's not any I'm forgetting. I'm going to just pull it up really quick on the system requirements. Give me just one moment here, and I'll tell you everything. Linux versions, yeah, Open Enterprise Server 11, SUSE Linux servers, and then of course Windows servers as well. And then yes, the databases are MySQL, Oracle, MS SQL, and then the one I didn't say is PostgreSQL. So those are the supported systems there. Just really quick, one other thing that I realized before we finish up that we didn't touch on, and that's Reload for Retain. Reload for Retain is an add-on for Retain that provides mirroring, failover, and backup for the Retain archive. Also, it's a push-button disaster recovery solution for your Retain archive, and it provides fast backups and triple replication. Really, the great thing with Reload for Retain is it's that push-button disaster recovery, which is what we call the holy grail of any backup solution, which basically means that you push a button and within 5 minutes you can log into a completely different Retain server that's hosted on the Reload for Retain server. So you have a separate failover system that allows you to, if your Retain system ever goes down, you can go directly into Reload for Retain and run your Retain system from there. Which is great because, as we know, archiving has become more of something that, as we talked about in this webinar, than something that you just throw in the corner and access at some point. It's something that has become more mission critical, more business critical. So if it does go down, that can be a problem. And so Reload for Retain gives you the ability to have a failover there. And just a little bit more information there is that it's actually a mirroring. There's mirroring in Reload for Retain to make sure that your Retain archive is fully replicated at all times. And this is a continuous replication of new data from Retain into Reload for Retain. So you'll know that the data that you're accessing, that you're failing over to, is current and is up to date. So when you do, if you ever do need to fail over to that, you have it. Plus, it is a backup solution. So if you do fail over, or if you have Retain go down, that when Retain does come back up, you can back that back into your Retain system, so you don't lose any information. If let's say that you lose your Retain system for good, you can always spin up a new system and get everything back from Reload for Retain. So here's just a quick screenshot of what it looks like here, being able to use Reload for Retain and configure that for backup and disaster recovery. Being able to use that for backup and disaster recovery. So that's a little bit about Reload for Retain. And that add-on product which can give you that backup for Retain. So those of you, if there are anybody on the call who's using Retain right now, that is a solution that you can add to back it up. And then those of you who are interested in going over to Retain, just know that is an add-on that you can add onto Retain.
At this point, we get people who ask, so what are my next steps? What do I need to do now?
Okay, your next steps would be to get a personalized demo or a price quote, and you can do so by visiting www.retainarchiving.com. Would love to win your business, so please go out there and we'll be sure to get you a personalized demo so you can see how the system can work for yourself, or get a price quote to see how what the price of Retain would be for your organization. And once again, thanks everyone for being here on this webinar. We're really excited for the information presented, and hope to see you on the next one.